Hello and welcome to another edition of the One Drink Book Club. Tonight we're going to be discussing A Walk in the Woods, a humorous and insightful travel memoir written by Bill Bryson. The book chronicles Bryson's attempt to hike the Appalachian Trail, a 2,200-mile-long trail that stretches from Georgia to Maine, along with his friend Stephen Katz. My special guest tonight is Nick Bowers, my son, who just finished Thru-Hiking the Appalachian Trail with his girlfriend Hannah Murphy just last week. Thanks, Nick, for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
First off, congratulations on finishing the trail. I mean, that is a really big accomplishment, 2,200 miles. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. And also thank you for picking us up and being a part of it along the way. Really appreciate it.
Well, our pleasure. Our pleasure. So as you know, you've listened to a few episodes of the One Drink Book Club, and the Bill Bryson book talks about the trail, talks about his attempts to hike on the trail. What cocktail did you make tonight inspired by the book and the trail itself?
So this is a proprietary cocktail, one that Hannah and I thought of while we were on the trail, when we were thinking about what things we might miss from normal life. So as we're walking, especially up in New Hampshire and Maine, we started smelling all of the fir trees and wanted to make a cocktail that sort of captured the essence of all of the trees in the forest. So I call this the North Woods. It's bourbon, peated scotch, maple syrup, Angostura bitters, and a little bit of fir bitters. So it gives it that woodsy flavor. And then a little lemon peel here. It's kind of like an old fashioned, but I call it the North Woods. So that's the cocktail for tonight.
Nice. I think I am very impressed that you invented a cocktail for it. My cocktail tonight is, I just went with a standard Moscow Mule, because you guys were basically pack mules for 2,200 miles. And if you don't know, a Moscow Mule is a pretty simple, refreshing drink. It has 2 ounces of vodka in it, ginger beer, and lime juice, and you serve it traditionally in a copper cup. So it's a nice summery drink, but it is very refreshing as well. I'm a big fan of Moscow Mules.
Absolutely, very tasty, and it's kind of funny actually. As you'll see in the book, the two, Bryson and Katz, try very hard to abstain from alcohol. So it can be a little challenging to find a book-inspired drink, considering that.
Very true. Very true. It's not like you were going to pick what they were drinking.
Yeah.
So I assume that you read this book prior to actually doing the trail.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah. And partially just because people would ask me, you're hiking the trail, have you read A Walk in the Woods? And, I didn't want to have to say, no, I haven't. So that was partially the inspiration. And then also, my own interest.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I read it when you kind of said that you were going to want to do this. I thought, well, I had the same thing when I told people, oh, Nick's going to be hiking the trail. They said, well, have you read A Walk in the Woods? So I used it as kind of my first primer as to what kind of things you would be tackling. And I really enjoyed the book. I don't know about you. What did you think just from an entertainment standpoint?
Oh, I loved it. I think it was super funny, super informative. Yeah, very interesting and fun read. It did not feel at all laborious. Yeah.
No, Bryson's a really funny writer, and I think the addition of his friend Katz, who is kind of this overweight, middle-aged kind of disaster of a person trying to hike the trail with literally no experience, no prep work, no hiking prowess or camping prowess, made for some funny stories. But what I think what the biggest thing I thought was interesting to me was kind of the history of the trail. I thought that stuff was really fascinating because the trail is not that old, and the it changes. It's changed a lot through the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of my favorite parts as well. You know, the actual portion that he hiked ended up, not being the entire trail. So, spoiler alert. But
Spoiler alert: he doesn't make it.
yeah, he kind of makes up for it in terms of talking about the history of the entire trail, all the way from Georgia to Maine. He talks about, the plant and animal life along the way, the conception, and then the execution of blazing the trail, all of its iterations throughout its history, which started in 1920, 1930 something, 1937, I think. Um, the first through hike was done in 1948, which he mentions. So yeah, that was 11 years after it was created. Um, but yeah, I thought that portion of the book, which is a significant portion, was well worth reading, and a very interesting part.
Did it give you a good picture of what the trail was kind of like, even though clearly he didn't do um, nearly the whole thing? I mean, he did about 200 miles and then some kind of specialized hikes after that. But did you feel like when you started, you say, okay, this was he wasn't far off. He clearly took some time with it.
Yeah, I honestly, I've gone back and forth. At the beginning, having read this book but not having hiked the trail, I kind of thought, these stories are kind of bogus. Like, he's way over the top. And then as I start hiking, I start meeting these people, people that might be wildly unprepared or kind of like know it all, or, just funny people in general. I start to think, wow, actually, this is a somewhat accurate portrait of the trail. Um, and then, yeah, learning about the history was a great primer as well.
Clearly, uh, Bryson's a funny guy, and he had kind of a lot of little funny stories interjected in it. Clearly Katz added some humor to it just because he was kind of this bumbling, disaster on the trail. But what were some of the funny moments that you and Hannah came across on the trail? Was there anything memorable that where you just thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening?
Yeah, I mean, and uh, I guess talking to my father about this, he might not be the most proud. But there was a funny part of the book where Bryson and Katz are hitching a ride into the small town of Hiawassee, Georgia, which is pretty much the first major town you hit along the trail. And um, as they're trying to hitchhike, they finally get a car to come over, and it turns out to be this young couple. And clearly, they'd been drinking. They said they're going to get married tomorrow. It's this whole fiasco, and they're trying not to get killed, as the driver is clearly impaired and swerving all over the place. And Hannah and I had kind of a similar experience up in Connecticut, where we wanted to get a ride to a pharmacy because I had gotten some new medication, and a guy kind of swerves off the road. He says, "Where are you going?" We say, whatever town it was up the road, and he responds with, "I don't know where that is." And we're like, "Well, okay, well, where are you going?" He says, "I don't know." And we're like, all right. And we see in his front seat, he's got a bunch of open beer cans. He's, hitting his weed pen in, just a total mess. And we're like, oh God, what have we gotten ourselves into? So, he takes us. At this point, we're kind of locked in there. And, he's trying to show me a picture on his phone. He's, trying to avoid the cops that are in the town we're in. And we're like, okay, can we please get out at this point? And eventually we get out and, get to the CVS pharmacy. But it's just crazy stuff like that actually happens on the trail. The stories in a walk in the woods aren't. I believe them. They're not. They don't sound exaggerated.
That kind of brings up a question. I mean, what were the kind of people? Was there any kind of stereotypical hiker that you came across? The people who were through hiking the trail, did the people you meet kind of surprise you, or were they from all different kinds of walks of life? I mean, what was kind of the typical uh, hiker that you came across?
Yeah, I honestly don't think there was a typical hiker. I had this image going into it where everyone would be some, young, fit, kind of crunchy person, with a lot of hiking experience, very technical gear. And that really wasn't the case. And I honestly should have taken or paid more attention to a walk in the woods. Katz and Bryson are clearly not your stereotypical hikers. They're older, out of shape. One's a recovered alcoholic. All of these things that don't add up to a very successful hiker. And I saw all of that on the trail. I saw people who were recovered addicts. I saw people who were in their 80s hiking the trail, some even through hikers. I saw young people right outside of high school, people like me and Hannah that are recently graduated college. There's, Army veterans, there's hippies, there's homeless people, there's really all walks of life. And I don't think there is a unifying stereotype of a through hiker. If I were to say what's the largest demographic, it was probably around millennials, so 30s, 40s, with some hiking experience. But again, we met people from literally all walks of life, and it's hard to say whether there's a stereotype.
Interesting. Um, and one of the characters in A Walk in the Woods who was memorable was Mary Ellen, who was kind of this annoying younger woman. She was a know-it-all, and she kind of glommed onto them and hiked with them for several days, and was really driving them crazy. Did you find that? I mean, did you meet people who stayed with you? Did you have any Mary Ellens that came up, or what? Talk a little bit about the people you've met that you actually got to know on the trail.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's anyone exactly like Mary Ellen. She seemed to be this know-it-all, but didn't really necessarily have the experience to back it up. And, constantly providing unsolicited advice, just kind of an annoying presence. And we definitely got some of that. There are some people that would say either to us or to other hikers, you'll never make it to Katahdin with, insert piece of gear. We had a friend, his name was Smoke Master. We met him very late in the trail, and he carried this stupid little tea kettle with him. And at the end, it was purely sentimental value. But he told us, someone told him early on in the trail that you'll never make it to Katahdin with this little tea kettle. And so just to spite them, he brought it all the way and he summited right after us. And then there's, a few other people that would say, this is not how you cross a river. You have to do it this way. Or, you know, that mileage early on is way too much, or you're not going to make it if you're doing this few miles. So, there was some advice that was appreciated, some that was a little overstepping. Mostly the people, though, that we met were, justified in their advice given. So, not in. Sorry. Mary Ellen was an extreme example of maybe unsolicited advice that didn't have a lot of merit. And for the most part, we didn't meet that many people like that, luckily.
Well, tell me one of the things that I thought was funny. we picked you up at the trailhead for Mount Katahdin, and you came down with several people that you've been hiking with and that you knew for a while. And as you and Hannah came closer to the crowd, we all said, "Hey, Nick and Hannah," and your friends all looked at you like, "Oh, wait, is that your real name? Is your name Nick? And is your name Hannah?" Which I thought was really funny. So, talk a little bit about trail names on the trail.
Yeah, trail names are a big tradition on the trail. Usually within the first 100 or so miles, people will get a name. It pretty much is always given to them. You know, if you make it up yourself, it kind of loses its magic, but mostly it's given to you. Sometimes it's something you do, sometimes it's, just something you say. Um, my trail name was Gecko, and it was given by a friend who thought I was looking at the geckos in all the streams. That they were little salamanders, but it was whatever. And yeah, exactly. And Hannah's trail name was S'mores because she brought a bunch of s'mores to some of our first um, to some of the first shelters, uh, and people appreciated that. Started calling her S'mores, like, "Hey, S'mores, you bring any marshmallows today?" And so that stuck. So both of our names were given pretty early on. I'd say within the first 200 miles, and they just kind of stick. And we've met people with some pretty crazy trail names. You know,
Such as
yeah. Squirt, Mudbag, Mountain Goat, Feral Goat, Learning Curve, Smoke Master, Jimmy Dean. The list goes on, and each name is more outrageous than the next. There's a girl named Shitwater. So yeah, you
That's an
never know what
unfortunate
you'll.
one.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, a walk in the woods, I don't think covers that enough. I think maybe it mentions it, but neither Katz nor Bryson got uh, trail names, and so they kind of missed out on that fun tradition.
I think you're right. We'll talk a little bit about Katz and Bryson talk about their tent and sleeping arrangements and that they have these shelters along the way. But where did you end up sleeping most nights? How did that work?
Yeah, Hannah and I mostly just slept in our tent the entire time. There are shelters along the way. I think on average they're about every 8 to 10 miles. So if you need to stay in a shelter, let's say it's raining or you don't want to set up your tent, then it's a good place to sleep. But to be honest, sometimes it got a little crowded, or sometimes there's mice crawling on you in the shelters, and you kind of just wanted your own personal space. And yeah, Hannah and I definitely preferred the tent. And in the walk in the woods, I think Bryson and Katz, they were maybe about 50-50. Sometimes they would sleep in the shelters, sometimes in the tent, but we were definitely tent people on the trail.
And along the trail, how much of it, like how often did you come across a town and how often did you actually have cell phone service? One of the things in the book, they went through the Smoky Mountains, they had some periods where they felt pretty remote. And then at the end, they did try to do a little bit of the 100-mile wilderness. How out of touch with civilization were you? Um, and how often did you come across towns and had an ability to shower or restock on food and things like that?
Yeah, we probably went on average around 4 days between towns, or restocks at least. We wouldn't always stay in the town, but sometimes just get a restock and then continue to hike. And they talk about that a little bit. The first restock you get to on the trail is called Neil's Gap, and they called it something else in the book, the shop. Um, but yeah, so I'd say about 4 or 5 days between town slash restock, um, which made it pretty manageable. You'd only have to carry a certain amount of food, and yeah, that was nice. The trail ended up not feeling quite as remote as I'd thought. We ended up getting cell service about at least once a day. I think the more remote sections were the Smoky Mountains, and then up in Maine, it was very remote. But throughout the trail, in Pennsylvania and Virginia, you usually got service at least once a day, and I didn't feel too disconnected from the outside world.
You did this, several decades after Bill Bryson did. And so I think some of the traditions of the trail have changed or have developed just over time. And he also didn't do the whole length of the trail. What were some of the things that I know that the halfway point there was an ice cream eating contest, for example. But
Yeah.
what were some of the highlight, like the points along the way that were memorable?
Yeah. So yeah, again, I mean, he did it in '96, and we just finished up. It's 2023, and I think he mentioned in the book that only a couple hundred people would even attempt the trail back in the mid '90s, whereas now you get a couple thousand, maybe 3 or 4 thousand people attempting. So the landscape has changed a lot, and there's more people, which means more traditions. More interactions on a day-to-day basis, which I think is nice. And then we had covered the trail names, which they didn't really use, but yeah, the halfway ice cream challenge, they call it the half-gallon challenge. At the exact half point, which is in Pine Grove Furnace, Pennsylvania, the challenge is to eat a half-gallon of ice cream as fast as you can. And to visualize that, it's one of those big tubs of ice cream. It's 3 pints and then an extra pint on the side. So some people choose to eat the pint first and then the big tub, or the reverse. There's different strategies, but that's a pretty fun tradition. And we actually saw the fastest known time we saw the record being broken for the fastest known time. I think the previous time was around 5.5 minutes, but one of our buddies, Squirt, um, completed it in about 4.5 minutes. So he knocked off an entire minute. And one of his strategies was to, vigorously stir the ice cream and get all the air bubbles out, and then just absolutely devouring it. And it was kind of like watching a plane crash. I couldn't look away. It honestly distracted me from my own ice cream eating. But yeah, he completed that. I did it in about 17 minutes. Hannah did it about 30 minutes. And yeah, that was a fun tradition. There was also the tradition of Naked Hiker Day. I don't know if I've told you about this
Naked
off
hiker.
air.
I don't think I have heard about this.
Yeah. So the summer solstice, I think June 21st, is Naked Hiker Day. And this year we were in Shenandoah National Park, which unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, is a pretty high traffic area. So it's a little risky to be out there. Yeah. Neither Hannah and I, fully embraced the challenge. I think I stripped down to my underwear, but we did know some guys that did the full thing, and it was a sight to see. A dirty hiker,
Or not to see.
Yeah, exactly. Some guys went with just a loincloth. They got creative with it. That day was interesting though, because it was probably the coldest day we'd had in about a month, and it was drizzling the entire day. So, not ideal weather for that challenge.
No.
Yeah. So, those are some of the fun traditions that hikers do.
did you guys ever think about quitting? I mean, was there a point where you were either cold or tired, or, I mean, I'm sure you were cold and tired, but
Yeah.
did it ever did it ever, um, was it ever a discussion like, hey, do we want to finish this?
To be honest, I don't think either of us ever seriously considered quitting. I think there were times that we were super miserable. For Hannah, at least, she talked about, how cold the Smokies were. We got a little bit of snow. We actually started on April 2nd, which ended up being good because we avoided a lot of the coldest weather. Um, in the book, Walk in the Woods, I think they started early March, and they talk about getting snow and waking up to frozen water bottles, and we never had any of that, which is really nice. There were nights that got down into the 20s, but nothing as bad as what Katz and Bryson experienced. Maybe that's kind of why they decided to bow out early. um, but we did get a lot of heat though, because of when we started. So I think it was about Pennsylvania and New York. You know, the sun was shining bright, and it was blisteringly hot in the 90s. We're sweating the entire day, and the mosquitoes are coming at us. And so those days could get kind of miserable. But no, I don't think we ever seriously considered quitting. I think honestly, hiking with a partner uh, made it so that you're constantly encouraging each other, and if one person starts to feel bad, the other person can give a little bit more energy, which is nice. Didn't necessarily work out for Katz and Bryson, but worked out for us.
Did you run across many other couples, or were you kind of a rare thing on the trail?
There were a few other couples. To be honest, we saw a lot more early on. Um, so I don't know what that says about hiking as a couple. People usually said to us, either you're going to break up or get married after this. It's a lot of time to spend with one person, especially 24/7. But you know, we got through this. We don't hate each other now. But yeah, I think uh, there were probably about five other couples that we would consistently see along the way. So it wasn't rare, but it wasn't super common either.
Sure. What were some of the toughest? What was the toughest from a technical hiking standpoint? What parts of the trail were the roughest?
I think by far the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And Bryson talks a little bit about this, Mount Washington and Lafayette, Franconia Ridge, all of that stuff. It is pretty demanding. I mean, I think we were averaging about 15 to 17 miles a day leading up to the Whites. So uh, it kind of starts at Mount Moosilauke, which is kind of taken care of by the Dartmouth Outing Club, and then you hike farther up north and get to Mount Washington and Mount Madison, the Presidential Range, all of that stuff. And our average ended up dropping down to around 10 or 12 miles a day. It was super demanding, and going straight up and then going straight back down, climbing over rocks. Sometimes you'd have to like toss your hiking poles over and then climb up, or do the opposite on the way down. And that was pretty demanding, kind of hard on the knees, especially when it got slippery with rain. So I think that was probably the most technically challenging terrain. And honestly, it stopped, or it didn't stop until mid Maine. So New Hampshire and Maine were pretty challenging portions.
Now, which part did you think was the prettiest?
The same sections, to be
Oh,
honest.
real? Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
All
Maine and
right.
New Hampshire. I think uh, there's a long section in the middle that Bryson and Katz never really through hiked. I guess he went on some smaller hikes throughout Pennsylvania and uh, like New York and um, Massachusetts and stuff like that. But there is a long section in the middle there where the terrain is pretty level. The views are nice, but not spectacular. The It can just get a little bit, routine, I guess. But then you hit the mountains up in Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine, and I think that's by far the most gorgeous part of the trail. It's pretty breathtaking up there. There's tall mountains. The views are vast. Uh, these you get into these lovely spruce and fir forests in also the alpine zones, so it's completely treeless. You get 360 views, and that's the part I enjoyed the most. I think me and Hannah were saying at some point, if the White Mountains didn't exist, I don't know if people would through hike the AT. So it's a testament of their beauty.
Well, neat. Uh, well, was there anything? I mean, you would send back photos of some of these meals that you would get in these small towns. They'd be kind of these diner things, and
Yeah.
I was surprised too about the eating in general that you were not. Give me a standard day or an average day of meals. What kind of things did you eat, and then what kind of things did you eat on the trail, and then what kind of things did you eat in town?
Yeah. uh, so I think Hannah and I never quite got enough calories on trail. It is super hard to eat prepackaged, freeze dried food and get enough calories. So I think, a typical day towards the end when we kind of, honed in what we're going to eat is you wake up, you have a instant Carnations breakfast essential mixed with instant coffee to kind of wake you up a little bit. Maybe a peanut butter wrap, which literally is just peanut butter on a tortilla. And then throughout the day, we'd snack on the Cliff bars and Nutri-Grain bars and Nature Valley bars and every other type of granola bar you can think of. Maybe beef jerky, maybe packaged tuna, the flavored stuff, so like Thai chili or ranch tuna. I mean, it does not sound appetizing. It really wasn't. Not a lot of fresh fruits and veggies along the way. We would try to pack out, maybe some carrots, maybe some apples every time we restocked to try to get some fiber and some nutrients. And then a lot of the dinners were ramen noodles, instant mashed potatoes, freeze dried foods. Um, Something with a lot of calories, probably not the most nutritious. And then throughout the day, a lot of candy, a lot of like just super unhealthy stuff, Nutella, Snickers bars. I know in A Walk in the Woods they mention eating a lot of Snickers bars, and it's completely accurate. I think any hiker will tell you they just become a goat. They can eat anything and will eat anything, and so you know whether it's raisins or granola bars or Snickers bars or any other type of candy. That's what we ate. And then in towns, like in A Walk in the Woods, it was kind of a time to pig out and finally eat something like a cooked meal that wasn't freeze dried. So we would usually order, burgers. A lot of these towns didn't necessarily have like gourmet options, so a lot of it
Not
was
a lot of
pub
sushi.
food. Yeah. So we ate barbecue and burgers and pub food, a lot of French fries and stuff like that, and we would eat a lot of it, and then a lot of ice cream um, in the towns. So, if you read A Walk in the Woods and you're wondering if the diet is
Mhm.
accurate, it really is.
Um, well, what was the longest day you had on the trail? What in terms of I'm thinking about my own thing where I'm trying to hit 10,000 steps a day. How many steps were you doing, and what was the longest day you spent?
I think our longest day was in the state of Maryland. There's something on the trail called the Four State Challenge, where you hike from Virginia through West Virginia, Harper's Ferry, into Maryland, and then all the way through Maryland, which is roughly 42 miles, and to the Pennsylvania state border. And we didn't do this. So we got into Maryland. and then decided let's hike the rest of Maryland in one day. And it ended up being, I think, 35.7 miles. But the night before, we said, all right, we're gonna get out of here by 6 a.m. sharp and hike until we hit the Pennsylvania state border. And we ended up reaching it around 10:30 at night. So we did, a solid, I think at that time, roughly 2 hours of night hiking, which is never really that pleasant. You got your headlamp on and you're trying not to trip over rocks, especially down steep hills. It can be a little treacherous. So, what was that? Like 6 to 10:30. That was, 16 hours of hiking. Yeah, 16 and a half. So that was definitely our longest day. Yeah.
Impressive. Really impressive. How many marathons did you do? How many days did you do over 26 miles? Was that the only one, or were there others?
There was one other that we did, I think, just over 26. And then I'm trying to think. We really didn't do that many. I think our upper limit in terms of, hiking comfortably was around 23, 24. We had a lot of days that were over 20, but not many over 26. It just ended up taking a lot of time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, what would be your advice to anybody who is interested in hiking the trail? What kind of advice, either about preparing for it or researching it? What would you tell them?
I would say that gear matters, but not quite as much as you might think. When Bryson and Katz did their hike in '96, the gear was a lot different and way heavier than it is now. I wouldn't be surprised if Bryson and Katz's packs, before they threw out all their unnecessary gear and food in the first couple miles, I wouldn't be surprised if those packs were 50 plus pounds. And nowadays, if your pack is over 35 pounds, people will say, okay, maybe you should take out some of your gear. So it's, I think, much more manageable, and most of the gear that you would choose is not going to be too heavy. I would say the main thing is, an ability to tolerate discomfort. I think that's probably the most important trait of a thru hiker. There's a lot of just like tiny little unpleasant things throughout the day that end up adding up, and I think some people just say, that's enough, I'm not doing this anymore. you know Waking up and putting on wet socks, packing up your tent in the rain, fording rivers, stubbing your toe on roots. There's little things that really end up weighing on you. Mosquito bites, stuff like that. And I'm making it kind of sound miserable, but it's really not. I think, though, tolerating minor discomforts is a big trait, and then also just having the goal to finish and really sticking with it. We met a lot of hikers along the way that loved hiking, loved being out there, but just didn't really care about finishing a through hike. So, and that's completely fine. But in terms of through hiking, my advice is to, really prioritize the goal of finishing the trail.
Nice. Well, it sounds, again, congratulations to both you and Hannah. That's really impressive. Something you can look back on for the rest of your life as a real interesting accomplishment, but a real challenge. And so
Yeah.
I'm impressed, and you should feel really good about it. And I appreciate you sharing your custom proprietary cocktail, and also talking about the book with me. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah.
Well, good luck in your next endeavors. For those interested, what is next for Nick Bowers?
Uh, Next up on the list, I'm applying to grad schools for chemistry. Um, People sometimes joke that you're on the trail and you're hiking for roughly 8 hours a day, but you know, people by the end, you'll ask them what they're going to do, and they say, I don't know. And so sometimes, even in this time between, applying to grad school and actually going to grad school, we're still kind of ironing out those details. And so, um, yeah, going to grad school, but in the meantime, not quite sure.
Well, that's all right. Um, well, thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Please make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And I always appreciate a review if you get a chance. So thank you again, Nick. And we'll see you next time on the One Drink Book Club.